Hey guys, a couple months ago I saw a video on social media where there was an incident at a coffee shop where a teenager, I believe he's a teenager, he was throwing stuff around in a restaurant, totally unbothered, and he ended up hitting a elderly lady. And the husband came over visibly upset and I guess punched the kid a few times. And seconds later, after the kid was, I guess, kind of laughing along with his friends, the second stranger came along, an adult, and slapped the kid across the head. Now, the comments I was reading in social media, some of the commenters were, I guess, saying stuff about the grandfather, that he was out of line. And the other commenters were probably, actually, I guess most of them were in favor of the grandfather. And to be honest, I think a lot of us Gen X men were probably happy that the grandfather protected his and stood up for his wife. Because I think for at least 10 seconds, it kind of made sense to us, because it wasn't just about one kid in a restaurant being unruly, but I think something in there hit the Gen X men emotionally. And it's something that I think that we've been thinking about and probably carrying around with us for a long time. And that happens to be the unwritten rules that we followed as kids back in the 80s. And we all learned that, if you did something wrong, there was consequences.
Quiet! 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 Quiet!
And correcting kids in public for bad behavior was the norm, And I think that's the part that really bothers me, is everything was kind of centered about the old man, the grandfather, and his behavior. But and people talked about the slap by the second adult, but nobody asked the question, and that is, how did the kid, get that far without boundaries and without like knowing where the line is drawn when you're in the public. And I think that kid, I can't say that he's all to blame, all the blame lays on him, because I think he probably failed long before he walked into a restaurant. Because back in the day, back in the 80s, I sound like an old fart now, but back in the 80s, if you were an a-hole, I mean, the adults would, or someone would teach you a lesson. And we were taught that actions have consequences. And if you mouthed off to the wrong person, boy, you got sorted out. And I'm not saying that everything in the 80s was perfect, because it wasn't. But, for instance, a lot of us got overcorrected and hit by our parents when we shouldn't have. And a lot of us got disciplined with anger instead of wisdom. And I talked about that in previous video, where about where do we draw the line, and where do we find a balance between abusive discipline and no discipline at all. I think the last, decade or even more, that we lost something important. Because back in the day, teachers can discipline, neighbors would say something to you if you were out of line. Other kids' parents would correct you and grab you by the collar if you were misbehaving or doing something stupid. And let's not forget about our parents. If you did something wrong, boy, did you get it on the spot, and you got it at home. So it wasn't perfect, but as kids growing up in the 80s, we knew that there was a line that you don't cross. And the neighborhood, all watched out for you. I mean, they always, if you were getting in trouble, they knew that to correct you and tell your parents right away. And I think that to a certain extent, that kept us in line and civil. And I always remember that we had, so much respect for the elders. And we never questioned the elders because when they corrected us, we always assumed that they were correct because of their wisdom. Now, I want to share you a little story about an incident that happened at my dojo probably about almost close to 10 years ago. And I've been in the martial arts for decades. And what had happened was one day we had a couple of kids who were 12 years old come in for a trial. And from the get-go, they weren't listening. They were very unruly. They tried to disrupt the class. And one of them was very arrogant. So one of my coaches decided to put one of them against one of my female students. And of course, this kid thought that he was just going to throw my 12-year-old junior student around. Well, she ended up throwing him around like a rag doll. And he was frustrated, he was embarrassed, so he stormed off the mat and ran to his mom and started crying. And I asked my coach, what happened? And he said, well, that kid was being so disrespectful, so I put him up with one of the female junior students to teach him a lesson. So I thought, okay, well, that's good. That's good. I hope he learns something in being humble and respect. And maybe tomorrow when he comes back, he'll be better for it. The next day, I get in, and class had just finished, and these two kids didn't leave the mat as the other class came on and start horsing around. They were pushing each other, slamming each other into the wall, and basically putting the rest of the class at a big risk for injury. So I didn't say anything at first because one of the kids' fathers was there. So I sat at my desk and I looked at the father, waiting for him to correct the kids and basically tell them that to behave themselves. But I was shocked. Instead of correcting the kids, he was laughing. He was laughing at them and laughing with them. And he thought it was funny. So I got really upset. So I, raised my voice and, corrected him harshly. And I said to them, I said, this is a dojo. You don't come in here and disrespect the place and act like an animal here. And they stopped immediately, walked off. But the father, looked at me and tried to stare me down like he was going to say something, right? And I stared at him sternly. And I thought, don't you dare even open up your mouth, because I thought, what an embarrassment, And he realized that he wasn't going to say anything to me. And he quickly packed up and left with the kids. And I turned around and I said to the coaches, and the parents were there as well, and I said, this is the reason why your kids come to martial arts training here, because I want you to all grow up to be respectful of other people's spaces and everything. And you're going to find out quickly if those kids keep going down that road, how they're going to end up. So that incident made me wonder, did we create a generation of kids who are entitled, who don't respect the boundaries, because certain parents want to be their best friend instead of being their parent? And these are the questions I start asking myself and start seeing. And, when those kids don't grow up with boundaries, they become, like the teenager in the coffee shop throwing food at customers or at an elderly lady. The father in my dojo didn't correct his son, and the parents of the kid at the coffee shop obviously didn't correct theirs. So this is the byproduct of this, and now we have this the rest. Now the rest of the world has to step in and act like an adult and correct these kids. And the funny thing is, we see this happening a lot, and the offender gets a pass now in society, while the passive parent gets a pass, but the adult that steps up to correct the behavior, gets made the villain. And I think, and I know a lot of Gen X men, they're not cheering at the fact that, or wishing that the kid at the coffee shop got hurt, right? But I think they were relieved a little bit because, for the first time, somebody acted like an adult, the grandfather, right? And we also don't want to see a violent world, but I think all of us can agree that we want to see an orderly world. And I hope this kid that was in the coffee shop, learned his lesson, and that, and I hope his parents will teach him to know better and to realize that other people matter as well, not just him. So my question today is, did you see the video, and what was your first reaction when you saw it? Were you angry? Were you uncomfortable? Or was there a part of you that kind of was relieved and said, finally, somebody said enough's enough? If you like this video or like the content on my channel, feel free to like, subscribe, or share. And feel free to check out my next video. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.